Hey lads and ladies, I'm here with another video. Now, I love games. They're giving me some of the most immersive and life-changing experiences I never even knew I wanted. But for me, I think the endless potential for gaming rest is in VR, and I'm glad that this somewhat niche section of gaming has been getting more and more attention. The endless amounts of creativity that comes from these games, I think it's fair to put the spotlight on my favorite dev team, and you all know who it is. It starts with an S. Drum roll. Stay. Sorry, that was hard to say. I mean, stress level 0. I don't know how they do it, but they have somehow made the perfect VR game for me. From the story to the gameplay and the overall magic they made me feel as I played this, there is no game I have ever played personally that supported mods. Yes, they just supported mods straight from the community to the game itself, and that in and of itself can be its own video, clearly. And although I could go on and talk about all the stress level 0 games, and try to make a loose prediction of Hall of the Machine King, that would take months, and I am not that advanced in all of Video Editor, trust me. But I do want to tackle one mystery of Boneworks, Duck Season, and Bone Lab, and that is the identity of X. Now, if you had never played any of the Stress Level 0 games, why did you click on this video? Go play them, they're great. It takes a lot to understand the story, but it is well worth it. But if you still don't want to play all three, here's an abridged version of the Stress Level 0 meta lore. So, a kid named David rents a bootleg Sega cartridge that is cursed with the Void being in the dog costume. And this is the first time we are introduced to the idea of the Void, which is a place separate from time and space, and it holds a thing called Void Energy, and it can be used to create and manipulate virtual worlds and real-world physical spaces. And this is home to cryptids, which are entities that have the intent to rule the world and bring chaos. And dear old David trapped himself with a being that can do all those things. So long story short, there are multiple different endings to Duck Season, but the canon ending is the one where the dog kills David's mom and David kills the dog and runs away in the process. Thanks to this event, Monogon, who is a tech company in the early 90s that later grows to have a monopoly on everything, finds this haunted cartridge, reverse engineers the game, and finds the Void, and later uses this in development of their own VR games, which then leads to the start of Boneworks. Now, quick little thing to understand is that in the Stress Level 0 metaverse, whenever a person puts on a VR headset, you're not looking at a screen, but your mind is being uploaded into a new plane of existence. So it's like a dream in the sense that you're being transported to a new world that feels real. But in this case, the Void is being used to transport your mind, and this is why dying can be a little more intense to the player, but a whole new level of real for the characters in the story. So now that that's out the way, in the events of Boneworks, you play as Bootleg Gordon Free. You play as Arthur Ford, who is a security director at Monogon Industries on a quest to enter the Void and become immortal. And more or less, you succeed. And this is also another game where the being known as X is helping us. Now, I know what you're thinking, for those of you who have played the games. Well, I can see how you think Alora could be X, but if X is meant to be Alora like you claim she is, then why would she help David in the events of Duck Season when we know she only had ties with Ford and Boneworks? And to that, I say, the explanation might shock you. And this leads into Bone Lab, which is Stress Level 0's latest game, and it is where you play as yourself. You are on a quest to join the Lava Gang, who are possibly ex-developers, and most definitely modders who are trying to tear down Monogon through MythOS by taking over the Nullmen, which are virtual workers created by the Boneworks engine, and the Lava Gang is making them self-aware that they are in a virtual world, and thus wreaking havoc on what's left of Myth. And from what I have played and seen from the game, the character X does not play much of a prominent role in this story than he or she did in Boneworks. But let's talk about a few things that Bone Lab did set up that could help us in our theory. So, in the start of Bone Lab, we wake up in the Void as a weird skeleton-shaped specter, and I think that this confirms what happens to someone when they enter the Void. They become a separate entity from their body, but still somewhat have at least an understanding of at least what they are. And this could confirm what Ford or other characters become once they enter the Void. We are also introduced to the idea of avatars, which are kind of like skins that the player can change into, but you would feel and have the same properties of the avatar you play as. And this can be seen in game, where whenever you switch into a different avatar, you gain that character's benefits, but you also gain their negatives too. Like when you play as the Heavy, you're strong, but you're really slow. And it seems like this is only possible with a body log, or a 6-sided dice that we see at the start of the game. which let you switch avatars. In fact, this could be the Void's way of changing characters. Now, one thing that is important to the start of Bone Lab is Fantasyland, which in the events of Boneworks is a location where you fight King Forge so you can enter the Void. But in this version of Fantasyland, it is populated by sentient nobody AI and possible ex-Boneworks developers that are in hiding from upper management after the whole you-know-what. So, these group of villagers are being tested and monitored, likely due to the effects of Melonbelly, which is a drink made by the Lava Gang to turn the nobody sentient and wreak havoc, and so on and so forth. And although they seem to act like humans and do similar things as people, the Nomen don't seem to want to come up with any ideas for weapons or beer. So when the people who monitor the citizens of Fantasyland started to send them tools that are implied to do more than just hammer and nail, that's when the ideas of weapons started to rise within the village. Sorry this part is taking so long, but TLDR, some of the citizens of Fantasyland found out about Monaghan's abandonment of the Fantasyland game, and so they closed off the well where they got all their resources from, and the people of Fantasyland had collectively decided to set some rules that are made to establish peace, but we were caught breaking the rule of accepting modification to body, mind, and environment. So after our player character broke this rule, we were sent to our death, but end up on a quest to join the Lava Gang, so we can build an army and bring controlled chaos and stop whatever new lurking threat that Jimmy, our radio friend, seemed cautious to talk about. And although I have two ideas of what this threat might be, let's get back to the identity of X. So X's main influence in the Stress Level Zero metaverse is when he or she helps Ford on his quest to enter the Void. But the real question is, why would he or she be helping us? Well, dear viewer, that's because that X is Alora from the future. Now I know it sounds weird, but here's my evidence. So as we play through Boneworks, we run into Alora multiple times, and she always talks about our goal to enter the Void, and apparently she's the only one who knows that we're actually here to do that. And she keeps telling Ford to lead the way in and thank her for her contributions. Okay, now this is where it gets tricky. So towards the end of the game, right after we see a TV message from Alora, we get a gravity gun, and when you move the bed that the gravity gun was sitting on, you see a message from X. Now, this is where you really need to think about it, because we know the Void works outside of space and time, so it's not far out the box to think that Alora is from the future, because if X never helped Ford find a way into the Void, then Alora, her past self, would have never entered the Void to become X, and never would have told Ford to leave a way in. Plus, we do see more than one Ford in the game. We even see an older version of Ford give us a gun, proving that the same character can be seen in different ages. Not to mention, this was before he entered the Void, or at least before Arthur had some major contact with Void-related things once he entered Myth. Now, I know there are some holes in this theory, but I think I can justify them. So, starting with number 1, we know that X exists in the events of Duck Season to help David, but David and Ford are two different people, right? Well, I have two answers to that. So the first answer is just basically MatPat's game hypothesis, in which he states that David could be Ford due to David being the only other person to have direct contact with the Void through the killer dog and leaving the Void particles after he killed it, and realizing its power. And that would give him a motive to come back and face the Void by joining Monaghan. Now I admit, there are some things logically wrong with this, like how is David supposed to get an education, become a security director, and if that wasn't the case, why would Monaghan hire somebody with no experience? Now David and Ford could have been self-taught, or have been adopted and went to school, but even that's a stretch, but let's go with it. But what if I told you that this goes even further? Let me explain. So we know David's mother dies in the canon ending, and David is just a kid when this happens. So there's no doubt that something like this would weigh heavy on a child's mind, especially due to the unnatural means in which it happened. And this would teach him that death is the worst thing possible, and he should prevent it. And what better way to do that than to become immortal and put death out of the equation entirely? And think about it, when you're a kid and you learn about death, you know it's dreadful, but it's a natural thing to hear about, but you don't want it to happen, and at the same time, you're not thinking about the real world consequences of becoming immortal because you don't want to think about death and what it does to others and how it affects you. And when you think of it like that, Ford's motivations feel a lot more justified and well thought out since death affected him in an impactful way to the point where he wants to take death out of the equation entirely by using those same unnatural means. Okay, so now that we have a good reason to believe that Alora is X and David is Ford, we need to establish why X helped Ford in Duck Season and form a small timeline of X's influence in the Stress Level Zero meta story. So here's my idea. I think that X helped David survive the events of Duck Season because if she never helped him, Monaghan would not have rose to power because we know when David killed the dog, he left traces of void energy from those 3D blood pixels, a pure form of void energy. And in MatPet's game theory, we see that same house from Duck Season in Boneworks. Although it's not completely the same one, there are some elements he pointed out in his video, like the playground, the fencing, the swings, and the mailbox are all the same, and we see a giant Monaghan office building next to it, along with the gaming cartridge that was used by Monaghan to discover the void, and keeping David alive, who later becomes Ford and enters the void, is essential for X to exist, like how Ford was stuck in a loop. And if you don't believe me, the proof is in Boneworks when Alora found the USB stick. She would need to know that Gamer had access to the void to understand why this would help or even be important to Ford. In fact, this is a pretty far reach, but what if the gaming USB stick is what she meant by her contributions? Because we know Ford only had 2 things before he started his quest to enter the void. All he had was that VR headset that was stuck in a Saberlight case and that gaming USB stick which he used to hack the servers. So there's a possibility that Alora had a past with Gammon, or at least knew enough to know that Gammon used the void before Monaghan to understand the importance of it.